Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, and I wanted to revisit a country that has like a vast array of literature, but that I don't talk about too often because mostly their literature is still in the Indian format. I don't think a lot of it has been translated, or I can't really find translated versions at times, especially for the more well-known authors. But I did find one today, which is pretty cool. I'm talking about India, of course. And the story is about a neglected wife. I am referring to Lihaaf, or The Quilt, which was written by Ismat Chughtai, which was published in 1942. For those who don't know, and I have a feeling that if you're not Indian, you might not know this story or this author, but Ismat Chughtai was a lady author who wrote throughout the 1900s. She was known for writing about class, sexuality, and feminism, some of which you see in this story here. She won a number of awards for her work, including that of the government itself, which is always nice. And in between, writing about all of this stuff, which she wrote quite a bit, she also made movies, which I think is pretty fascinating. She's regarded as a pretty big feminist for India. And a lot of her work was controversial. I think there was even an obscenity trial about this story in particular. And you'll see why as I talk more about it. But I'm glad that I stumbled across this author, and one of my Indian friends told me that she had read this story before, and I think she even likes Ismat Chughtai. So it's always good to hear from other people about this sort of thing. But hopefully I can show some of my American friends this story, as they might not know about her. Without further ado, let's talk about Lihaaf. I will do a summary, a little bit of an analysis, and we will move on from there. Lihaaf focuses on the narrator, who is unnamed. She is a small girl who lives with many brothers and sisters, and she is constantly fighting with them. So her mother sends her to live with her aunt, Begum Jan. Begum being a name for someone of high class and kind of royalty, who lives with the Beg Nawab. They're married together, although unfortunately Begum Jan is neglected by her husband. As the story is told, we find that he does not have any prostitutes or like any escorts or anything at his house, concubines or whatever the proper term is in India, but he does have a bunch of young male students at his house. The implication being that he is a pedophile of some sort, if those are really young boys. I don't know what the rules are in India, but pedophilia is pedophilia, I think, regardless of what you do. It's just I'm just enforcing American standards on a different culture, but it's clear that Nawab is more focused on these young male students than he is on Begum Jan, and so she kind of just wastes away with no one to focus on her. However, the family does get a servant girl pretty soon named Rabbo, and Begum Jan becomes rejuvenized by her presence and her massages, where it's noted that Rabbo scratches itches, and as a result, Begum Jan begins like looking younger and feeling better. Although the narrator notes that if they were scratched like that or massaged like that on a repeated basis, they would just rot away eventually. While the narrator is sleeping, which is near the same room as Begum Jan, she begins to hear strange noises coming from Begum Jan's quilt, and things are shaking underneath there. And she also hears Rabbo speaking, and the narrator is a little worried that someone is terrorizing her aunt. The narrator asks, and Begum Jan just says, no, nothing's going on, go back to bed. Unfortunately, a few days later, Rabbo and Jan began to fight. The Begum Jan sends Rabbo away, and Rabbo is presumably dealing with family matters. And the narrator, in an effort to make her aunt feel better, who's gone into somewhat of a depression, just scratches her aunt's back, and this produces a strange reaction out of her aunt, who begins to be overly familiar with her and promises to buy her quite a few things, I think, in order to keep things quiet or whatever. It's very unusual there. But Rabbo returns back, and Rabbo and Jan are reunited. And Rabbo even says that raw mangoes taste sour, I think is the implication with Jan's relationship with her what supposedly is supposed to be her niece. But they reunite, and Jan seems to be a bit happier. And the following night, the narrator is sleeping in her bed, and she looks at the shadows on the wall, and she sees what appears to be an elephant. But when the light grows brighter, she's actually seeing what is happening in the quilt, which is presumably, the narrator doesn't say it explicitly, but it's Jan and Rabbo having sex, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, I told you the story was published in 1942 in India, so you can already probably see the controversy, what caused the controversy in this story. And I think it's really two things, which I'll talk about in a few moments. But one of the ideas that Ismat is talking about with this story is sexuality, or the idea of the neglected wife. Kind of both ideas there. And Jan is indeed a neglected wife. Her husband doesn't pay attention to her. Her husband focuses on other things, and she is not having a good time as a result. She even the food in the house is not to her liking. There's not because it's aimed at the palates of the young boys who are in the house. So nothing there is really for Jan. She is a royal woman who can't leave the house and is forced to deal with not having any love or affection. And what she does find is love in Rabbo. She's rejuvenated and everything feels great. There's a good quote that I would like to read to you from this. Rabbo arrived at the house and came to Begum Jan's rescue just as she was starting to go under. Her emaciated body suddenly began to fill out. Her cheeks became rosy beauty, as it were, glowed through every pore. It was a special oil massage that brought the change in Begum Jan. Excuse me, but you will not find the recipe for this oil in the most exclusive or expensive magazine. Which I think is a little bit funny, that ending part where she's like, oh, you're not going to find this anywhere. But it's clear, you can see that the Rabbo's presence in this household produced a positive effect for Jan, who was dealing with the effects of being neglected. Like if your husband's not paying attention to you, you're not going to beautify yourself. You're not going to really try anything, especially if the food in your house is not to your liking. You might not even eat. But with Rabbo there, she becomes beautiful again, and she begins eating again, and things are working out for her. And so, in essence, what the story is about with this relationship between Rabbo and Jan is an exploration of lesbianism in World War II India, which was controversial in its time. That's one of the controversies in the story, is that Chughtai is talking about lesbianism, about these two people having a relationship. Or if not a relationship, just engaging in sexual endeavors. But not only is it that aspect that Chughtai is talking about, it's the idea of women enjoying sex. Because there's no male present here. It's heavily implied, or just outright said, that Jan and Rabbo are having sex. And there's no male present, so this implies that, or even says that, women enjoy sex, that women need sex, probably, to have a fulfilling life. And because Jan is not receiving it from her husband, she's receiving it from someone else. So, Jan might not be lesbian in this story. She might be bisexual or something like that. But I think that's less important than highlighting that there are implications of lesbianism going on. There's implications of the enjoyment of sex by women, which are things that you don't really speak about in in any culture, or like many cultures, because it's always implied that women shouldn't enjoy sex, that it should be for male pleasure only. I don't know enough about Indian culture to know if that was true in World War II, but given what was going on in the rest of the world, you might not be as wrong in saying that. And then some other controversial sexual ideas in this story are the implication of the husband's pedophilia. Not really outright said that the husband is having sex or trying to have sex, or even an admiration of these young men who are studying in his household, but it's heavily implied, like it's there. Why else would this husband focus so much on these young boys and not on his own wife, unless he were not gay or thinking about having sex with these young boys? And that's another controversial idea, because you're saying that the ruling class, the people in charge, are not having the relationships that they should be having. You're kind of saying the unspoken things that are true in this culture, but if you say them out loud, everyone's going to be like, whoa, you can't do that. You see a lot of this in American culture, where it was revealed through the Epsteins that the elites were kind of engaging in pedophilic relationships, although no one is willing to truly speak out on that. And then you could also argue that this is like the narrator becoming a woman, like recognizing her own sexuality and seeing it in others. As Rabbo says, like a raw mango tastes sour, kind of teasing Jan for even thinking about potentially having sex with her own niece. It's a weird implication there. But also highlighting that you can't push this young girl until she recognizes it in herself, until she's ready to be a sexual being. And maybe that's a stab at what men think, like that men in India are perfectly okay with having relationships with girls who are only barely in puberty, and it's like, that's not pleasurable for them. They're just young girls. Maybe a couple years down the line they'd be ready, but not right now. And then there's also the implication of the implication of like class differences here, because Jan and Rabbo are from different classes, I would presume, because of the class stratification going on in India, with Jan being an elite and Rabbo being a servant, but also heavily implied to be darker in skin. So if you, because I know that makes a difference in India as well, where the lighter your skin, maybe the more desirable you might be. But I can't speak totally to that, so I welcome anyone to correct me there. And then another interesting element of the story is the child's perspective. It's told from a child's perspective, I think, to give Chughtai some cover in saying, oh no, if you're seeing that's on you. This story is told from a child's perspective, where they're giving back scratches. But again, I think that's meant to sort of symbolize the narrator's like development into a sexual or adult woman kind of being, recognizing her own maturity or something like that. The narrator cannot see what's happening at first in this story. Like she sees shadows on the wall, she thinks it's an elephant, or there's a stranger in the room and something has to be done about that, kind of scary. And she also views what's happening between the narrator and Jan as massages. And there's some gossip going on too, which the narrator thinks, oh, this must be because Rabbo is treated well in the household, not because the people outside of the household are gossiping about a relationship that might be going on. Whether or not that gossip is reaching the Nawab, the man of the house, it remains to be seen. But if he knows about it, he's certainly not doing anything about it. Possibly because that would require him to acknowledge what he's doing in the first place, or something like that. And when the child does see what's revealed, like they say, oh, I'm not going to reveal what's happening. Again, kind of an implication that Chughtai doesn't want to kind of reveal what's happening. She's going to lead you to the conclusion, but she's not going to outright say it, because that would be true obscenity in Indian culture or something like that. But the truth is very shocking to the child, I think, because once they realize their own sexual nature or something like that, this development, this metamorphosis into an adult, like the truth is shocking. Like, wow, these two women are having a relationship, they're having sex, they're engaging in sexual endeavors, whatever you want to call it. That's quite different from what I've been taught my whole life. Is this normal? Is this okay? I think Chughtai wants us to ask those questions. And like, if the man and the woman of the house aren't having relationships and they're engaging in their own things entirely, like who does this wrong or whatnot? Like, sure, the child is upset, but you could always talk to the child about what that means. And it's important for children to see healthy adult relationships and whatnot. So just something to think about there. But I do think it's very fascinating how Chughtai tells the story from a child's perspective. And it forces us to, kind of jump to conclusions or kind of laugh about how we know what's going on, but the narrator themselves does not, because mostly this story would be read by adults. I doubt this is actually taught in high schools or anywhere like that. Anyway, those are my thoughts on Lihaaf, or The Quilt by Ismat Chughtai. A pretty solid short story, one that I can definitely understand why it's controversial. I don't agree that it's obscenity or wrong or anything like that, but I can see why people would be angry with Chughtai. And this is the kind of stuff that she wrote about in the 1900s, the kind of feminism, kind of the ideas that she's touching upon here. And based on what she's seeing going on in India at the time, especially as it gets its independence, which I think is really interesting, makes her a really solid author, and I do want to check out more of her work in the future. I'm going to recommend that you also read this. I'll put a link to the story in the description. Read it. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this author and the short story if they do not already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and quilty travels. Farewell.